Hello economics enthusiasts, my name is AlzaboHD. As fans of the channel know, I'm all about exploiting outflow, and in today's video, we are going to transform a tribal state into a first-rate narco state. That's right, we're talking poppies and backing the big smokium lobby with the goal of taking our number 4 exporting rank of desert dank to the number 1 status of supplier state. Afghanistan is famous for being the graveyard of empires, but in this campaign, our aim will be to trade and raid our way to prosperity and ultimately become a cornucopia utopia. And speaking of raiding, this video is sponsored by Raid Shadow Legends. Raid your way today and explore this online tactics-based RPG with over 600 champions that you can employ on dungeon runs, campaign battles, and PvP arena matches. When I'm not narrating alliterative adventures, I'm a raiding legend, and I enjoy the strategic turn-based combat and great graphics you can expect with this legendary title. Recently, I've been raiding as the alliterative Angar, and you know you gotta grab Gogorab. But that's not all. This month, you can get some of the strongest gear and champions in raid history with the launch of the new season of the Forge Pass and the release of the Southern Watcher faction. Become a legend and download Raid today, either with the QR code on your screen or in the description box below. You'll get a starter pack with Aina the Epic Champion, 200,000 silver, 1 energy refill, 1 XP boost, and even an ancient shard, so click the link, support the channel, and get your treasure at the top right of your screen. We'll start our campaign by selecting Afghanistan and opt for Inshallah mode. Our precarious polity puts us in position of one of the least developed and unrecognized states in the entire game. This emirate is a theocratic autocracy, and while this is a struggling start, we'll begin by researching medieval military technology and putting police on our streets. Surprisingly, this bankrupt and backwater barony has over 40 mujahideen, so we'll recruit a general, rid our halal holdings of haram liqueur, and focus our production on the construction of wood, wheat, and special seed. If we are to succeed as a narco state, we'll first need to create a path to the coast to export our cash crop, and Kalat has got to go. Our foes have the Turks on their side of the table. We've got a shisha-puffing poet ready and able, and despite fierce resistance, Kalat's capital was captured, and our police whooped in to stop their resisting. All cops are Baluchistani, and their land was in our hand, but a wave of rebels threatened the empire, so we'd have to strike back with our death sitar. The entirely innocent emirate of Mekwan would take on our false flag, and despite the Turks now on our side and unarmed units on the other, the enemy capital was toppled. Invading Russians were slaughtered by the Sultan, and the coast was finally clear. With port access, we could finally fulfill the fantasy of shipping ourselves ships, sort our papers in cabinets, and import guns to start some fun. The neighboring rug really held the room together, but Persia was about to be painted black. This rugged war would pit Persian against Pashtun, but the numerical advantage of the Iranian infantry was no match for our polity's technology. This so-called peer in prayer was a piece of Shiite and unworthy of their title of rival, and with Tehran taken, the Iranian nation ceded 40% of their pre-war territory. Further land would be prospected by Sharia scientists, and prohibited potables were sent haram their way as exports to Russia. We would boost our domestic production of lumber, export opium to the west, and opt to wrest control of the poppy plantations to our north. With Russian support, Kokand was cracked into tribal Tajikistan, Bukhara was broken into Uzbekia, and the unfortunate Khiva was culled into Russia. To our east, the Qing sought only one thing, and our market would export pure poppy seed while our construction sector was in need of more resources. We would thus set our focus abroad, and while colonization came late to our illiterate emirate, by 1845 we could unveil our Sharia sails and avail Aboriginal Australians of their didgeridoo-dads. Kabul was growing, Oman needed to be gone, and they dragged in Khiva and Iran, Mal al-Haram. Too bad their irregulars were Jalalabad, and Fars thus fell, and Laristan as well. With our economy in hell, we'd have to make sacrifices, and while some of you might die, it was a sacrifice our emir was willing to make. This pursuit of property sent our soldiers into sin, and our subsequent win awarded Afghanistan her first subject state. But our overseas colonies yearned for a halal helping hand, and inshallah, Bhutan would be broken. The Dutch smoked too much, Aboriginal Afgharalians were peacefully pushed into the gold fields, and the Bhutanese were on their knees. At least their dying breath would not be in vain. Back in the court of the Caliphate king, a deal with the dervish was made, and holy fire would befall the princes of Persia. This Shiite blight upon the Persian plateau had to go, and Kabul called upon Khuzestan to join our clan. But outside these lands, Britain dock-blocked our Afghan Maori colonies, and it was beyond time to ban surfing. Administering our expanding emirate requires boosting our bureaucracy, upgrading our iron frame game, and of course popping out plentiful poppies for our peasant proletariat. But in the Pacific, our black flag unfurled over Hawaii, where they were occupied and vassalized in under 3 business days. With New Zealand colonized, we could also set our eyes on the spicy Strait of Celebes, and our Caliph greatly increased military development to modernize Afghanistan's army. This Pashtun platoon would soon make moves on Pashtunistan to the east, but the Sikhs remained unfazed by the Anglo-Indian Civil War. Carpe Deli Diem, it is time for war once more, and though we suffered setbacks in the south, our newly minted military singed the Sikhs and controlled their streets. Their heretical capital fell in 1862, and by July, our emirate expanded its territory, while its population more than doubled. Our love for bureaucracy could now be enshrined in public policy, and we became a major power, but still remained unrecognized by the international franchise. That being said, the West was reluctant to recognize our rapid rise, and Kabul would have to use force to enforce this diplomatic discourse. We would need to succeed against a major power, and who better than Scandinavia, the weakest link of the Western world? They had the audacity to try to remove our voluntary labor force of poppy producers, so we would bring war to their Greenlandic shores. Sharia don't like it, rock the Kozuinguit. With Greenland gone, the Icelandic invasion was on, and while we failed to fell Norway, Sweden had failed to win the day. They gave us a Nobel Prize of recognition, and we had obtained a name in the international community. Our once primitive polity was now the second most prosperous poppy producer, and with the advent of the railway, it was time to make our way into industrialization. But other nations had other ideas, and our naive emir started this era by signing an unequal treaty with Britain, granting them an obligation that would prove to be a huge mistake. Chemical weapons were now a thing, our Pashtun people reigned supreme, and there would be no brakes on the engine of progress. Oman was kicked out of Gwadar and puppeted, a professional army was assembled, and our capital of Kabul called for the subjugation of the Sikh Empire. These pretentious Punjabis were slapped in the face, and with their sovereignty erased, the naughty Najis knew better than to question their place. Progress drove our liberal emirate to expand across the Arabian Peninsula, perhaps infamous in its quest to push polities by subjugating them and forcibly opening their border for the Afghani army. Before long, almost all Gulf Coast countries had fallen. Dirt roads made way for railways, and spies would soon flow from Tropical to Dore, the latest tributary to surrender without a fight. The Sulu knew better and thought they could resist our opium ships, but they were mistaken, and narco-enforcers were dispatched to their nation. Their Dutch allies were no match for our migrating mujahideen, and peace had puppeted the latest of our Pacific polities. It was time for a medical and global intervention, as the people needed our poppy seed, and we would bring you your fix by blockading your ships and putting the poor into Portugal. These impoverished Iberians would pay for their addicted ways, and the African wars resulted in yet more puppets for our profits. In the midst of our industrial and military revolution, word had reached the Pasha that London was falling, and it was beyond time to wipe out the blight of British India and save the South Asian nations from sobriety. This so-called Raj was ruled by Sir Bannerman of South Bengal, and with our German friends called into the conflict, England backed down and granted their crown jewel independence. India was no longer dependent on Britain's attendant and could now be contested, but the odds, like the opium, were in the Indian Company's favor. Regardless of the danger of such an endeavor, our Islamic infantry smoked out the south, while the enemy advanced near Kashmir. Repeated attacks by our fleet failed to find ground, but the enemy was war-torn and wary, and ultimately agreed to concede Punjab and Delhi. This dank deed propelled our poppy seed production into overdrive, and we had finally achieved our dream of being the world's premier rug dealer. We would go on to yeet the Sikh sheiks to our east, while to our west an independent Wales made international headlines. With Kashmir now printing copious amounts of contraband, we earned a trophy for our traditional form of trade, and Casey Jones was driving our train of progress, high on propane and propane accessories. Inshallah, God and guns are on our side, and we were at last blessed with a newborn heir and industrialist politician who personally oversaw the education of the upcoming generation. Youth employment was up, GDP was soaring, and a small price was paid for the march of industry. It was beyond time to pump up our numbers, declare jihad on Awad, and defend our way into Ireland to arrest their British allies. For reasons that are not entirely clear, the ghost of British imperialism was then able to push back our sacred soldiers. Despite them having no army, and despite being outnumbered 11-0, our forces ran away from the frightening British cuisine. This glitch in our simulated reality miraculously ended, and at last allowed us access to Northumbria. Nope, we've been gnomed yet again. This obnoxious war yielded little more than a patch of dirt in South Asia, but dirt, like latex, would nurture our nascent nation. Everything was all alright in our economy, and with the opium trade secured, Afghanistan could now focus on construction capacity. There were subjugated slaves to be saved in Nepal, and we would heed their call by vassalizing them all. Let there be light, funds for guns, mass taxation, and volunteers to churn out our industry. A call to conquer the BR state was met by fear and loathing, but they too would back down and join our theocratic crown. But an emirate divided cannot stand, and it was time to play our hand in Basra and unite by land the sovereign sands of our Arabian and African puppet polities. It is said that war never changes, but in Victoria 3, in-game speed proceeds to nosedive near the turn of the century. With Afghani GDP at number 7, the ancient capital of Persia procured, and the Ottoman Empire in dire straits, it was time to push into Thrace. Our Pashtuns had single-handedly destroyed Turkey, liberated Kurdistan, and contiguously connected the country with the client states of Africa and Arabia. 70 million citizens now called our caliphate home. We fulfilled the need for our masjids, and the UK would pay for everything in clay. Islamic liberation of the Hindu nation was followed by a naval invasion of Britain, and with London calling to Pashtun prayer, the UK was forced to liberate their Indian subjects and transfer control over the Arabian atolls. With our new neighbors nominally free, it was time to reinterpret their liberty and put them under new management. Rajputana would be reclaimed, steel frames do not inflame, and the East India Company and China proclaimed intervention in our liberations. For the first time in history, Kabul would have to call on mass conscription in order to match the numbers of these hostile hordes. Regardless, Gwalior was soon scored, Bengal was beaten back and absorbed, and a white peace meant that China could be ignored. Turmoil doesn't matter when there are no term limits, and over 120 million farmers could now join our poppy plantations. This Pashtun party would never end, and despite the suffering of the 98%, GDP was now at number 3. But success breeds jealousy, and Austria sought to cut us down with a coalition. Luckily for the Habsburgs, our narco-navy failed once, then twice, then thrice in our naval invasions of Italia. Nobody will know of our records if we burn the record straight, and opium and automobiles would create a great fate for our future state. In Europe, the German Tsar fell to the DDR, and the world's first communist country. Our emirate enshrined the Sultan's speech as supreme, and peace had at last fallen in the East. It was the turn of the 20th century, and Afghani prosperity had graced the Persian, Arabian, and Indian seas. Our proud population was only 90% oppressed, our impoverished Emiratis had no expectation of living, and barely anyone could read, but there was no need, as our economy was the 3rd largest in the world. Through the sweat and tears of our volunteers, Afghanistan produces the most engines, electricity, dyes, and opium in the world, and leads production in almost every sector of manufacture. Over 82% of our population are peasants, laborers, and slaves, and this saves on cost and wages, particularly since so-called human rights would only be a blight on caliphal capitalism. And speaking of the Caliph, our emirate is ruled by the immortal Emir Akbar, whose popularity is no trap. Under his rightful rule, our Punjab state is the most productive and profitable in the world, more prosperous than even Paris, London, or Beijing, and in this region, opium is king. Afghanistan proper ranges from Iraq to the west, Russia to the north, Burma to the east, and Australia, New Zealand, and Tidor along the southern shores. A preposterous amount of Pashtun puppet polities populate Arabia, Africa, and Oceania, together totaling 21 subject nations, while further abroad, an American border corps awaited, an independent Wales and Occitan uprising were created, and a communist Germany and ascendant Austria debated. In the coming years, England would lose control over their crumbling empire, as even now their prestige had plummeted lower than that of our poppy theocracy. We will curry India into the future and spread our medicine to every denizen from Beijing to Britain. We yar Afghanistan. Before ending the video, I'd like to thank you, the Alzabo crew, for supporting my AI algorithm. I'm counting on you to strike the like button and subscribe to our titular tribe. In the coming days and weeks, we will return to CK3, Democracy 4, and maybe EU4, so let me know below what you'd like to see next. I'd also like to thank Raid Shadow Legends for sponsoring today's video, and if you want to check out the game, feel free to check the link in the description box below. If you're a fan of fiat currency, you can also consider donating to me on Patreon or by donating basic attention tokens to AlzaboHD through the Brave browser. Thank you all for your support, and it's time now to roll the credits.